What's up, RotoViz?
Welcome into the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Curtis Patrick. I'm joined by Dave Caban. We're back again. Dave, a $2,000 entry FFPC Main Event. This is as big as redraft fantasy football gets. There's only a couple thousand entries, and you still got a $1 million grand prize. We drafted from the 111 earlier this week. You can find that on RotoViz Radio if you want to find the audio, or you can check it out on YouTube. We live streamed that draft as well. Dave, I got news for you. We drew the 111 again for this draft.
Perfect.
We drew the 111 again. So, we've had a chance to execute this strategy once before, and we're going to roll with it again. You said you liked last time we streamed that you liked being on the corners. Next Tuesday, we'll be drafting from the 102. So that'll just be, at the other corner, and we're going to have all kinds of fun. This draft is now underway, Dave, and we've already got a slight surprise at the 101, Jamar Chase going with the first overall pick. So I'm going to get this queued up so everybody can see what's going on here with the draft board. And and then we'll go from there. What are you thinking? How did you like our team the other day? And who are some of your targets at that 111 spot now? We've got the Cooper Kupp news with his hamstring. Is that a guy we'd consider if he falls to the end of the first? Where's your head at today?
Sure. So I really liked the team that we constructed earlier in the week. I think that you do have some options with the 111 where, there's some analogous players available to select from there, and it allows you to pivot and go different directions. I have some concerns about Cooper Kupp this year. Given, where we are already with him and the questions that you have in the offseason. So I'm not sure that he's a major target for me. I will admit, if he were to fall to us, it might be hard to shy away. But if I'm just looking at the way that the board's constructed now, with us being at the 111, I don't hate the idea of, and I wanted to kind of do it last time and we didn't go that direction, sandwiching Tony Pollard in there with another one of these top level receivers. Or, seeing if, I was in a draft the other night, actually last night, and AJ Brown and CD Lamb both fell. Now, in that case, I pivoted and I went CD and Pollard to kind of get a stack there, but something like Lamb and Brown, if that were to happen, would be a really enticing start. Oh,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'd sign me up for that all day. I think that the Kupp thing, it really just throws a wrench in the whole back half of the first round. I mean, you and I and Sean, all of us kind of liked him in the mid first. Yeah. It's just such a rapid reaction that you have to move somebody like that. I mean, just in the last week now, we've got Jonathan Taylor and Cooper Kupp totally changing the top, couple rounds of drafts. Sean and Ben Gretsch, RotoViz alum, they had an FPC team that they drafted yesterday, and they actually ended up passing on Cooper Kupp at the 109, and they took Amon-Ra St. Brown there. So, I think he is going to, he may be there at the 2-2. It's going to be interesting to think about. Dave, the top of this draft was crazy, man. Look at this thing. Justin Jefferson falls to the 103. I mean, it's been a little chalky after that, but man, what's this guy's name? Dave Waddle. Dave Waddle's pretty pumped right now to get Justin Jefferson at 103. He was not expecting that.
I've seen some odd things play out in the couple of drafts I've been in this week. I was in one where Jamar Chase fell to the 105. And as a result of that, you had a completely different first four picks than I had seen to this point. So this week, especially in these main event drafts, you're getting people going out on limbs here, building their teams differently than ADP would have you believe. And the first round really has just not been super consistent.
Man, we get a Saquon Barkley bullet.
Look at that. I don't think I've seen 5 through 8 go all running backs yet either. So we're in a completely different environment in this draft, Curtis, than we were earlier in the week. So it should be fun to see how we can build this out. And as it stands right now, you have Kupp, Diggs, Lamb, St. Brown, Wilson, AJ Brown. AJ Brown has actually fallen down out of being listed as the 15th player in the FFPC Q2, which is a bit of a change. So that AJ Brown CD or AJ Brown another wide receiver start certainly in play. One of the things that we focused on our last draft was getting these players on the high-powered offenses. And, we might have an opportunity to do that with, all right, well, Diggs goes. That would have been incredible if he had fallen. He could have started like Diggs Brown, but.
It's brutal to see Diggs go just as an auto pick. I would have loved to have had him there. Yeah, I mean, we had AJ Brown here at this 111 the other day. I'm fine grabbing him again. We're probably going to have access to Garrett Wilson at 2-2 again if we want to do that. So I also don't mind the idea of diversifying that first round pick with our squad and maybe going CD Lamb or Amon-Ra St. Brown here at 111 and then still going back and grabbing Garrett Wilson at the 2-2, assuming he makes it. So, I'm kind of in on, all these guys, obviously, but I'm definitely not automatically in on AJ Brown. So Amon-Ra St. Brown goes 1-2. We're on the clock now, Dave.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the thought process here between, I guess it's really between CD Lamb and AJ Brown for us here again?
So I guess we kind of need to think about what we will do with the second pick. Could we go on a limb here, take a receiver, then come back and hit Cooper Kupp, try to scoop him up there? Or I think another option, Curtis, might be to go Nick Chubb here and then pair him with one of the wide receivers. Quick thoughts on that?
I think Chubb, if we take a running back, I'd rather have it be a guy that fell into the second.
Agreed.
We could get Chubb or we could get Pollard in the second. So maybe we just take AJB here again.
Yep, let's do it.
And then that way it keeps us free to take Pollard if we would want to do that in the second, and we wouldn't feel like we're stacking him with Lamb.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I will say too.
Well, we've got $4,000 on AJ Brown so far, Dave. In our Main Event drafts.
If we had gone CD, my total dollars on CD would be starting to approach like 4 digits. Man. So, we start off with AJ Brown again. This is played out very weird with just 4 running back sandwich between 5 through 8. It's going to be fun now too to see when quarterbacks start going off the board. They've been kind of going in different places. So Garrett Wilson just goes.
Yep.
So I think now we're staring down a situation. Oh wow, CD goes as CD. Well. Yep.
So we can go running back here. But we are also in a spot where Mark Andrews could be interesting here. Because we're set up in a spot where that 3-4 turn is a good area for Lamar Jackson, Dave.
Yes.
So I mean, honestly, I kind of want to go either Devontae Adams or Mark Andrews. I'd like to steer clear of these 2 running backs here and either just put another hammer down in a premier wide receiver. I've actually moved Cooper Kupp a spot below Devontae Adams now because he has all the advantages that Kupp had.
Yep.
Being an elite target getter, but he doesn't have the injuries and he doesn't have necessarily the quarterback concerns.
I'm thinking we go
Andrews or Adams. You like Andrews here?
Adams. Let's go Adams.
We're going to go Adams. Okay.
I meant to say Adams, not Andrews. The 2 A's are throwing me off here.
Well, yeah, let's do that. Let's do it.
I will give my quick reasoning there. I do think, though I love Jalen Waddle and a couple of the guys right behind Adams in that wide receiver hierarchy, I do think that, if you're going and making a slight tier break, right, like in the wide receivers, that is where it happens after Adams. And I think that though, there might be a tier break behind Andrews in the tight ends, I think we got a couple more options at tight end that, could fall to us in a spot in this draft that I would like. So I'd rather secure Adams here and then see how things play out. Maybe Darren Waller, we could get, a couple of picks from now. Or Hawkinson, there's some injury concerns there. Or am I wrong on that? I think I might be making. Yeah, I think I'm making it up, right?
Hawkinson was feigning an ear infection, and then he just got a $60+ million contract.
Okay, right. Okay,
or last night. So no, he's healthy, man.
Okay,
I'll tell you why Devontae Adams is interesting. Let me load one more player in the queue, Dave. Dave revitalized our range of outcomes tool.
Yep.
This year, and it is really, really freaking cool. We've got a second here before we need to go back to the draft board. Let me pull this up because this is why This is why Davante Adams, man. So why don't you tell us what's going on here
Sure.
in this graph? I've got Davante Adams, Dave. He's the red hill here. And I've got him pulled up with Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Tyreek Hill. So the consensus top 3 now that Cooper Kupp has been bumped out of that area versus Davante Adams. And Adams has the most attractive range of outcomes curve.
Sure. So what's going on here is we've done some math in the background that's looking at each player's 2 most recent seasons, looking at things that matter to look ahead and find similar players in the subsequent seasons to the ones in which the player we're searching for produced stat lines similar to those players. It then uses those numbers to build a realistic range of expectations. And here we're kind of plotting out that distribution. So what you can see is for Davante Adams, approximately somewhere a little bit below like 10% of his matches went for somewhere around 17.5 points. So what you want on this graph is you want the largest concentration of your distribution to be as far much to the right as possible. And you can actually see that Jefferson, Hill, and Chase have more of their distribution to the left, meaning that it's reasonable to expect that Davante Adams in his range of outcomes for the coming season has more outcomes which are favorable in comparison to those other 3 wide receivers. As a result of that, you can make a case that he has just as much, if not more, upside than any of these other guys with less downside. Now, of course, this isn't a perfect process, but what I think it does speak to is that though in our minds, we might be grouping Hill, Chase, and Jefferson above Adams, which I think is fine for people to do. But from a more objective standpoint, he might really not be that separated from them when you're removing some of those subjective and external considerations that a tool that's built off of a model can't account for.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the great wide receivers tend to just stay great until they're, look at even Antonio Brown, as crazy as he was getting late in his career, he was still putting up elite numbers. And Davante Adams now has done this with multiple quarterbacks in multiple cities. I mean, I don't want to be the guy that's projecting him to fall off a cliff, Dave. I think we could be looking at 300 plus targets from 2 of the top 5, potentially top 5 to top 7 wide receivers in fantasy football as the cornerstone of this squad here. And I mean, there's really no, with Darren Waller gone, and the lack of temptation for Jimmy Garoppolo to latch on to a tight end, at least early in the season. I mean, even if you like Michael Mayer, the rookie that they've got out there in Las Vegas, I mean, it's going to take some time, I think, for that other safety valve to emerge other than Jacoby Myers. So Adams, I mean, it's kind of hard not to just see him having like 10 plus targets a game. So I'm pretty excited about this. Andrews, who was our other target there, Dave, let's kind of catch the stream up here. Andrews fell to the 2.9, which is pretty far. That's good value. I like that. I like that pairing with Tyreek Hill. And then that manager also adds Jalen Hurts. That's a really interesting start with 3 potential positional, overall number ones on that squad. Just looking across the rest of these teams, Josh Jacobs now going at the end of the second. I've seen that with a fair amount of regularity in the drafts I've been doing. The Cooper Kupp went 2-4 to the same manager who timed out and got Stephon Diggs. So it's going to be interesting. I hope that we don't have an auto draft situation out of that spot the entire draft that could make things a little bit ugly / unfair.
Right.
So, we'll have to see. I might throw a note in the chat for
a lot
FFPC
of money for
commissioner. Yeah.
A lot of money to be auto picking, but I don't know. Maybe some people don't feel that way. I certainly do. Mahomes / oh, this is a good question, Curtis.
Yeah, Jake asks Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen in the middle of round 2, or Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones in mid to late rounds. The thing with Richardson and Daniel Jones is you can actually just pair them, and then you can see, you can see who emerges as an every week threat, or you can play those matchups. The middle of round 2 is too pricey for me, for Mahomes and Allen. Middle of round 3, I love it. I mean, and Dave and I have been taking, even at the beginning of round 3, we've been taking those quarterbacks throughout our high stakes drafts this season. But round 2 is just too early to pull the trigger. I've even been steering clear of that very popular, as this manager did in this draft, that very popular Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes slot from the 102. We've been steering clear of taking Mahomes there and seeing which quarterbacks get around the curve to us. Now, there's 4 more picks in front of us, Dave, here.
Yep.
And speaking of Josh Allen, he's a player that if he falls to us here, I'd have some temptation. Our boy Keenan Allen, if we want to really just put together a there he goes. Right as we mentioned him, I was going to say Keenan Allen will work there.
Full disclosure, that doesn't really bother me that much because we don't have to have the Keenan Allen conversation that we've had almost every draft.
Yeah, no, it's totally fine, man. It's totally fine. So Amari Cooper goes. There's a lot of yellow on this chart. Okay, so I think maybe this manager from the 1-9 had some guys loaded in his queue. I mean, I hope. It's actually not a bad squad for being on auto draft so far. This is Stephon Diggs and Cooper Kupp and Jahmyr Gibbs. So we're on the clock, Dave. Josh Allen, super tempting here. Let's think about what might happen at the turn, though. If we didn't take Josh Allen and the manager at 12 took a quarterback and took Allen, we'd still be able to get Lamar Jackson coming on the way back. But I think I like Allen a lot better. I mean, I think that, he's on a different side of that tier.
Sure.
The other considerations here are just maybe the back end of that running back tier with Ramondre Stevenson, or actually in this spot the other day, we took Travis Etienne.
Yep.
So for me, and then Debo making it around the corner would be interesting, but I'm not sure I want to take him in front of Josh Allen. So I think, Dave, I would prioritize Allen here unless you wanted to go Etienne and just have that overlap again.
No, I think I'd rather go Allen. And then that way that we didn't get Keenan Curtis, you're still getting an Allen in there. I think it gives us some more options. I do think that in my mind, there is a little bit of a break between Allen and Lamar Jackson. This still leaves us the opportunity to choose between a couple of running backs, or if we kind of wanted to think about a couple of wide receivers, they're still there as well. So in my mind, Curtis, the running backs that we could realistically consider here are probably Ramondre, Najee, and Etienne, who we took with another team. I think that was a team earlier in the week. At wide receiver, there's Samuel, Watson, Moore, Hopkins, London, Williams, Deontay Johnston. That's the level of wide receiver right there. I am kind of interested in getting a running back here, although I suppose we should also take a quick look here at tight end. You got George Kittle, Kyle Pitts, Dallas Goedert. I'm not sure that any of those players make sense for us here. So where are you leaning, running back or wide receiver?
Well, we see the 112 team go DJ Moore. That's actually pretty early. It's a half round early. I'm wondering if he's going to take do you think he takes Justin Fields here early and just gets that stack? I'm kind of curious. Or maybe he thinks Fields does get into that actually round. Maybe he's thinking 5-12 because he knows what we won't take a quarterback now.
Right.
So that's kind of interesting. Let's see what he does. I would be in maybe on Debo Samuel. I really don't mind the overlap with Travis Etienne. We've differentiated this team in rounds 2 and 3 from our 111 team earlier in the week by going Devontae Adams and Josh Allen, but we would have some overlap with AJ Brown and Etienne, some common rooting interest from our teams in the 111. And as I'm comparing him to, Ramondre, so Ramondre Stevenson goes there at the turn. I think that Ezekiel Elliott is a bigger threat to short yardage touchdowns to Ramondre than Tank Bigsby is to Etienne, at least early in the season, especially after that preseason fumble. And then Etienne punching it in. And I'm just not in on Najee. I'd rather take the backup later. So Dave, for me here, it's either Debo Samuel or Travis Etienne. And I would be absolutely elated with either pick.
I'm going to say Travis. I think I lean Travis here. I think for a couple of reasons, getting the running back in there. And then if you ask me just like in a vacuum to go between Etienne and Samuel this year, I might have a hard time making a pick, which makes me think that from a roster construction perspective here, Etienne is the way to go.
Dave, I'm laughing because I don't know if you were aware, the FFPC Fantasy Pros Championship Draftathon is going on. It started this morning. So I drafted a team at 10 a.m. today. From the 108. And I said, you know what? Maybe I'll just try to juggle 2 drafts while Dave and I are live streaming.
Oh my gosh.
So I've got another draft. I've got a Fantasy Pros Championship that I'm going to be doing at the same time as our main event.
I almost did the same thing as that, but I knew that you were doing something. I was like, the last thing we need is two of us and one at the same time. So
what? I'm just curious, Dave. If you were a betting man, what draft slot would you bet that I drew?
I would bet the 111.
I drew the 111. so I'll be drafting simultaneous 111 squads here. That FPC squad, FPC draft is going to be trailing by about 4 rounds, I think, by the time it starts. Yep. Maybe we'll check in just once in a while on that one because the timing will be nice. It'll give us a chance to pop back and forth. We've got some more questions in the chat here that we can get to as well.
All right.
You want to take this one, Dave? I got to get my draft board set up on the other one.
Waddle between. All right. So how would you rank Waddle, Higgins, Smith? I think that, there's probably not a right or a wrong answer here. Personally, I think I would go Waddle, Smith, and Higgins. Why I would go that way? Personally, I've just always been a huge Jalen Waddle fan. I think that there's more of a case for Waddle to overtake things in his offense this year and be the number one than there is the other guys. Granted, that might be by a slim margin, and I'm not saying that I expect that to happen, but that's the case I would make for Waddle. Then Smith and Higgins, it's fairly close. But I think if you look at the pace that Smith was on in the back 6 games of last year, both he and AJ Brown were absolutely killing it. They were 2 of the top 5 players. As a result of that, I think it speaks to what they would be able to accomplish in this offense in Philadelphia. And if I look at who has the highest ceiling in them, I think it's probably still Waddle. As I mentioned, I would say that the highest ceiling of all of them is limited the most for Higgins in the confines of that offense there. I think that there's a couple of other options for Joe Burrow to go to, including Tyler Boyd, that even though, he's not taking away very much when you're kind of splitting hairs like you are with these wide receivers, it's how I would remove him from the battle there. Between Waddle and Smith, it's pretty close. I guess it just comes down to, I think that Waddle is just a touch better of a receiver overall than Smith. Of course, I've always felt that way. Curtis might disagree because I know you were one of the biggest proponents for Smith when he was coming into the league, and a lot of people were questioning him.
I think I'd order it the same way. Okay. I think I don't really have much to add to the conversation there either. But I would say, for me, there is that slight tier break. I'm not going to argue vehemently with anyone on Jalen Waddle versus Devontae Smith, but I do think there's that slight separation to T. Higgins. Although, we have seen T. Higgins be, super elite when the Bengals offense has gone slightly more concentrated. So, sure. In the event of a Tyler Boyd injury or Jamar Chase injury, I think he would enter that same arena, with those other guys. So, Dave, things are slowing down here in the 4th round as people start to think about their strategy through these big time money rounds. I think rounds 4 through 10, it's where you start to see team strategies come into play. And we had a couple little surprises here in the first 3 rounds, but when you're dropping this kind of jack on a draft, ADP does inform a lot of what's going to happen early, but now we've seen some people start to veer. Now, I will say, over in my other draft, it's at the 110, so I'm getting ready to make my 111 pick, and the board looks very, very similar. If CeeDee Lamb is selected here, the only difference will have been that Saquon Barkley didn't go before my spot. Tony Pollard actually goes in front of me in this other draft. So I am going to not take AJ Brown here on this other squad, and I'm going to take CeeDee Lamb just so there's a little bit of a difference here between the 2 drafts we're doing.
Big rooting interest in CeeDee Lamb for both of us this year. I think he's going to be one of those guys we end up talking about a lot on the show. So
let's talk rounds 5 and 6 here, Dave. Yeah. So we've had some balance. I think, towards the end of round 5, we might have an opportunity at George Kittle or Kyle Pitts. So, if we want to get into the tight end position here before our preferred guy at that 7-8 turn that we've been taking, we could look at Kittle or Pitts. From a wide receiver position. I think Deontay Johnson would be a guy I'd have a lot of interest in at this turn. And then from a running back perspective, I don't know that these players will make it back to us. But I start to think about players like, J.K. Dobbins, Kenneth Walker, Javonte Williams, James Cook. It's kind of that range of players. So do you have a positional preference or any specific player targets you think that we've got to hammer into the queue here?
So there's a couple of wide receivers in this range that I'm not too jazzed up about putting on this team. As a result of that, I think we might end up looking at running back. That said, we have talked about our liking for guys like Christian Kirk and Terry McLaurin, so I think they become interesting. Deontay Johnson, we already have on a couple of other teams, but we've talked about there's a lot of reason to be favorable for Johnson this year. So I feel like we're going to have a lot of options. Now, in regard to the discussion about tight end, I don't really love Kyle Pitts this year, and I'm not sure that I'd want to go and prioritize George Kittle at this point over some of the other running backs or wide receivers that we mentioned from a team building perspective. So I feel like we're probably just going to be locked on into whichever wide receiver or running back we like the most with our pick at the 5'11". Then given what we go with there, I think that will drive our 602.
Neither you or I has been in on Kyle Pitts this year, and I don't have a ton of George Kittle. I've been taking him when he falls.
Yep.
Man, Sean's in on both of these guys. He's got him listed both as priority targets in his recent articles, and so that does give me causes me a little bit of pause, but.
So I will say this, Curtis, too.
Yeah, go ahead.
I spent some time looking at Atlanta the other night and working through different ways that you could tweak their projection, looking at upside and floor for different players. And I will say, Kyle Pitts, you can come up with a pretty reasonable expectation of him being somewhere around the tight end 6. You can easily get him to being the tight end 3. And when you try to work on the downside, barring something going completely sideways for him this year, it's hard to get him falling out of the top 7 among tight ends, top 7, top 8. So I can definitely understand the case for him. I still, though, I just have trouble buying into it. Out of the players in Atlanta, I find myself the most attracted to, well, obviously Bijan this year, but of the pass catchers to Drake London more so than Pitts. So, I guess I could be talked into Pitts or Kittle for that matter, but they're just not some of my favorite options this year.
Yeah. You pretty much covered my thoughts there. Some of our players that we talked about for this next turn actually just got cleared out, kind of all in a row. We saw James Cook, Javonte Williams, and Deontay Johnson go 3 picks in a row. Those were all guys that we were talking about for this 5-6 turn. To layer onto your comments about Kyle Pitts, Jerry Delegati in the chat says Ritter has to be better than Mariota was last year, right? At least floor wise. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a low bar to clear, Jerry. I would tend to agree. I don't know that Ritter is going to be a superstar, but he also probably doesn't have to be. He just has to not turn the ball over and be good enough that they don't always call run in those neutral situations. I mean, they definitely have the weapons. Yep. So it's just a matter of, what do you think Ritter is actually, capable of? Why did it take so long for him to overtake Mariota in the first place?
I think some of my concern too is just touchdown volume in that offense that's going to be, scored via the air, which I think when you're looking at players in early rounds like this is something that's hard not to pay attention to, because very often it becomes the total number of touchdowns a player that puts up that either has them towards the top of like a position break or the bottom.
The people want us to take a running back, Dave. Jake says strong wide receivers keep building balance at running back. Well, I mean, we're not going to cave to the chat, but it's good.
I've had an uncomfortable amount of balance.
Yeah,
I've had an uncomfortable amount of balance between wide receivers and running backs this year. So we'll see how it goes. That said, though, I have been taking a lot more running backs in the early rounds this year than I have in the past, and I think that's probably a trend across the site this year. So if we did look at the running backs right now, you got Kenneth Walker, Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins, Rashad White, Alvin Kamara, Miles Sanders, Cam Akers. So there definitely are options there. We'll see what happens between now and when. Okay, Kyle Pitts goes, so he's removed from the conversation. This team 9 already has Gibbs and Harris, but of course it's on auto draft, so who knows what's going to happen there. I think even if two of the running
gonna
backs
get
get cleared.
Well, he's no longer on auto draft because he
Oh,
would
he
have already
isn't.
selected.
Correct. Yes.
Right. So I
Very
think he
astute, sir.
logged in and took himself off. If he was still on auto draft, he would automatically get Kenneth Walker here.
Right.
But I think he's logged in now. Let's see. But he's gonna time out.
Now, Curtis, catch me up on your stance on Kenneth Walker. Do you think that he falls very appropriately into this tier of player with J.K. Dobbins and Rachaad White? Do you think he might have a case for being a tier up?
Well, Walker and Dobbins are not in the same tier as White. I mean, they're above White. I'm not in on White at all.
Yep.
Walker goes there. I would have been really pumped to get him.
Me too.
Here. I mean, speaking of Dobbins, Dave, that's probably the player I'm most excited about here. Our wide receiver.
We have a couple of options at wide receiver.
Yeah.
That are the same to me if we had to go with a wide receiver here. So I actually am inclined to agree. I think Dobbins is a player that you and I have both been pretty high on this season, getting him in the 5th round. Then we can ease up on running back, I think, for a little bit. So let's do it.
Yeah, we can. I like the odds of, one of these three has to be available between Mike Williams, Brandon Ayuk, and Jahan Dotson in the next round. So, we're going to get at least one of those guys. And I think I would have them all kind of similarly priced here. Dotson has he may, of those three players, have the best opportunity to lead his team. It's debatable whether he actually will or not, but he's certainly in no worse a position than Mike Williams versus Keenan Allen. If you look at Jahan Dotson versus Terry McLaurin, I do expect the Commanders will throw the ball less overall than the Chargers, but those are both team wide receiver 2 guys on squads without, super notable tight ends. When you start to talk about Ayuk, it's like, now, he could be anywhere from the alpha to the 4 there. So the range of outcomes in any given week is not awesome. Love Ayuk in best ball, and I love the talent in general. Okay, so we correctly projected, Dave, that the team at 12 would get Justin Fields. His gamble to wait till the 5-12 paid off. So he's got that pairing with DJ Moore. It's fun doing battle with this guy. I quite like that squad. He's built that in a way that's consistent with, a lot of the RotoViz strategies. So he's only going to be able to take one wide receiver here, obviously, with this next pick.
Yep.
How would you order Dotson, Ayuk, and Williams? And is there anybody else that we should consider? Is Dallas Goedert an option for you here in that mix?
Dallas Goedert is an option here. I think in relation to the receivers, the way that you mentioned them is probably how I would have it. I would have Dotson, Ayuk, then Williams. I do think it's interesting, though. Should we have any conversation about Terry McLaurin here? Does he need to make his way into it? Because we do have Dotson on other, and he just goes. So, Curtis, I would be open to Goddard. I'd also be open to Christian Kirk or Brandon Ayuk.
I would not want to take Ayuk or Kirk over Mike Williams.
Yep.
We never talk about Mike Williams in this area because he's not usually available here.
Right.
So he has slid, nearly a full round versus where I typically see him. I think for me, if we want to differentiate tight end versus some of our other squads, we can go with Goddard here. Or if we want a piece of that Chargers offense, these are 2 great offenses with 2 great quarterbacks.
Yep.
So honestly, I'm fine with either of these players here with Williams and Goddard.
I kind of want to go the direction of Goddard here.
Okay, we'll
do
it.
Tight end in. I think now we're going to be just fully focused on wide receiver for a little bit. I'm going to ask you. You said you were fine either way. I felt a tinge of disappointment coming from you.
It's not that. And Mike Williams goes the next pick. I think those were the 2. Those were the clear values on the board. I think Goddard does have the upside to potentially. I could see him finishing as high as tight end 4.
Yep.
So I think that there's some reason for excitement there with Williams. We've been very in on Keenan Allen, so I kind of liked it as a hedge on all of our Keenan Allen investment. And on the off chance that Williams just actually overtakes Keenan Allen as the alpha in Los Angeles, he would just have crazy upside. I've got to make a pick in my other draft here real quick, sure. Dave. Why don't you riff on what's happened the last couple picks?
Sure. So Mike Williams goes the pick right after us. Then Jonathan Taylor. This is pretty interesting. And I'm trying not to sneeze here. So the team that auto drafted Diggs, Cup, and Gibbs and Harris then goes George Kittle, Jonathan Taylor. So I think that this is going to be. Excuse me. Oh man,
is Henry the cat in there? Is that where the allergies are coming from?
No, he's because it's during the day. They don't have to be confined in a spot in the house where they're not going to disturb everybody that's trying to sleep. So the pets are having free range right now. But that team, JR Dogs 2 now, I think has a very differentiated team than most. Can't say that I love it, but it certainly is a different build. We did have a couple of questions come through, Curtis, here. I don't know if I have the ability to display them on the screen, so I'm just going to read them. Lamar Jackson for Breece Hall. I have Hurts as my starter. I'm assuming, I don't know, I would have to imagine this is super flex, which if it's super flex, I'd kind of have to know the rest of the build a little bit more to be able to speak on it.
Manuel, we need you to clarify your question if you want it answered. Is this redraft? Is it dynasty? Is it super flex? Is it 1 QB? We'll come back if you can give us some more information there.
Perfect.
Mikey Nem has a question as well, and I'm going to make my pick in my FPC, Dave, and I'll be right back.
Yep. Is it time to trade Cooper Kupp in redraft with the nagging hammy? Someone offered me D-Hop and Joe Burrow for him. Don't need a quarterback. Wow. This one is pretty compelling. I think that there is a case to be made for trading Kupp. I think it's just a matter of finding the right trade. I think the one that's presented to you there, if you don't need a quarterback, doesn't necessarily make your team stronger overall. I do think, though, the idea of workshopping different trades with Kupp that benefit your team a little bit more than that one would do make sense. I think especially in a lot of these redraft leagues, a slow start hindered by what's supposed to be one of your best players can really hurt your team. So it's worth it to look into exploring some of the options there. JSN and Quentin Johnson, round 7 and 8. Something like that is certainly interesting. One of the things that Curtis and I do like to do is get some of these younger guys that have a chance to break out onto our roster. So I think that's a very RotoVizian, Curtis and Dave type of group of players there to be targeting. There's a couple of other young players that we've seen gone, like George Pickens is a guy that we've been interested in who's now off the board. Ayuk, who we talked about, went. Christian Kirk's gone. So, JSN and Quentin Johnson are two of the type of guys that we're going to be targeting here, I think.
In my Fantasy Pros Championship draft this morning, Jerry, I took Jackson Smith Najigba at 708. So, I mean, you've got that nailed right on the head. He was my wide receiver 4 in that construct. Quentin Johnson didn't go till 2 rounds later. And I think you're typically seeing him go 1 to 2 rounds later. And, I think I get it. He's certainly not as well-rounded a prospect as JSN was. And he's similarly going to be the third option in his offense. But the difference is third wide receiver option in his offense, that is. But he's also got Austin Eckler contending for receiving target market share there as well. Whereas, in Seattle, things with Geno Smith have been funneled a little bit more through the wide receiver position. So, I think in terms of value this season, I think it's far more likely that JSN carves out a projectable week-to-week role with QJ maybe being a little bit more spiky. But hey, we'll see, man. We'll see. I mean, as somebody in the chat mentioned earlier, Keenan Allen's been a little healthier in recent years, of course, till last year. And Mike Williams has been a little bit luckier with his health. But both of those guys have, a reasonable amount of injury concern. If you just look at the course of their career, each of them has missed at least half a season, 1 or 2 times. So, I don't hate it. We like to attack the high-end rookies, and we like to attack the high-end quarterbacks and the elite offenses. Let's take one more question from the chat here, Dave. Then we got to start focusing on what we're going to do at this 7-8 turn, because this squad's it's way different actually than our 111 team from the other day, which is exciting. So Jake, just pounding the questions here. Half PPR, I'm picking 5. I'm between Chubb, Kelsey, and Bijan, leaning Kelsey. Thoughts? I mean, so this is basically an underdog draft here, Dave. I'm taking Travis Kelsey of that trio. Just for the positional differentiation there, advantage. And then Manny came back and says it was a redraft.
Okay.
So this was that question about Lamar Jackson for Breece Hall.
Yep.
And he has Hurts as his starter, and his top 2 running backs right now are Rashad White and James Cook. So yeah, I would trade.
I would do that.
Lamar Jackson for Breece Hall and a redraft.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Okay. So speaking of Rashad White, he actually goes here in the middle of the 7th, just catching up. We were talking about JSN. He went at the 6-12. Evan Ingram. I'm kind of glad that we took Dallas Goedert now here in the beginning of the 6th day, because Evan Ingram has been our jam.
Yep.
At the 7-8 turn in all of these tight end premium drafts, and he goes 6-11. I would have been pretty disappointed if we had missed out. We've got Ingram in that tier with Goddard, Pitts, and Kittle. That is not common in the industry. I see people ranking Ingram even outside the top 12 tight ends
too. Yeah, which is pretty wild in my opinion.
I just don't see it, man. I mean, the Jags committed big money to him to year 2 in the system. Frank Reich has always liked to feature the tight end. Why did I say Frank Reich? Why did I say Frank Reich?
Why did you say Frank Reich?
I don't know. We're talking about the Jags here.
Do you mean Doug Peterson?
Yes, Doug Peterson. I do mean Doug Peterson.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just lumping Jacksonville and Carolina together here at this point of the season. That's fine. They came into the league in the same year, back in the 90s. Starter jackets.
Man, I remember that first game. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I would have been very disappointed to miss out on Ingram there. And I feel a little bit more relieved. So as we look at our squad, this is as balanced as you can really possibly be. I mean, we've got player at every starting position. We're basically filling our 2 flex spots here with these next 2 picks, and we can go any direction because we're going to be building that depth either at wide receiver or running back, even as we fill our flexes. So at the 7-8 turn, I mean, we still want to be swinging for some upside. Players that could run away and kind of be part of the, part of the $1 million story of a squad like this. 2 players that we have some exposure to across other drafts, but not necessarily on any of these teams. DeAndre Swift was going to be one that I was going to mention there. I also like Gabriel Davis with one of these picks here.
Yep, that was the player I dropped in the queue, Curtis. Especially compounded by the fact that we have Josh Allen, and this looks like a nice spot to get one of those younger players with some upside and a high-powered offense.
Yeah, I like Gabriel Davis. I would also be in on potentially, like Zay Flowers or Brandon Cooks. I think both of those guys are pretty interesting in this range. Cortland Sutton's a player we've taken in the 8th round a couple times. And, I think below that, we don't need to talk about it. So why don't we go Davis here with just a big time swing, and then we can recalibrate here after the corner.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about that one there. So now it becomes
Siri, to your applause, I don't know if that came through on the mic. Siri said, I'm just not sure about that.
Okay. All right. Well, all right, Siri. Hey, I mean, I'm sure there's some AI built in the back of there that's drafting some fantasy football teams somewhere.
Okay. So Zay Flowers, Brandon Cooks, we also have Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. So we were having the Commanders discussion at wide receiver a few rounds ago. We could have the Commanders conversation at running back. One of these guys, Brian Robinson, Sean Siegel named him his candidate to be the 2023 Josh Jacobs. I don't know about all that. I like Gibson better, but I have found myself trying to become a little bit more balanced in my exposure between the two, because I've been defaulting to Gibson almost exclusively, like in my best ball drafts over on Underdog and DraftKings, for example. But, I think there's something to the idea of just another wide receiver here too. Brandon Cooks has been getting, tons of positive press throughout Cowboys camp. We talked about CeeDee Lamb earlier, but, we could get back into that Cowboys offense a different way here. So I'll narrow it down here for us, Dave, to Zay Flowers, Brandon Cooks, or one of the Commanders' backs, unless you want to throw somebody else into the mix.
All right. I have a lot of reservations about that Ravens receiving group. I do like Zay Flowers the most. There's a part of me that actually wants to go with one of these Commanders running backs, but I think I would rather get a wide receiver in here. But
yeah, especially with Dotson and Moore coming off the board.
Right.
I'm on the clock in my other draft too. So by the way,
so I think then I'm gonna let you choose between Flowers or Cooks. You make that pick and then go deal with yours. And
I'm gonna take Cooks.
Okay.
I'm gonna take Cooks, and then I'm gonna flip over and make a selection in the FPC.
Sure, do it. So I do think that a case could have been made here for one of those Commanders running backs on a team that we expect to improve offensively this year. We do like that team's quarterback. We like a couple of the receivers. That said, though, I think we're at the point where you get more utility out of having more options at wide receiver to get into the rotation. We're probably expecting on this team that on a given week, our flex spots will be filled with wide receiver. Brandon Cooks looks like the number 2 in an offense that we like this year as well. So I think it makes a degree of sense there. Now, we had a question come in, Curtis, here, which is, should people trade Jonathan Taylor or hold out? I think this is another one where we'd have to approach it from 2 angles. You'd have to approach it from redraft and dynasty perspective. I think in redraft,
these are probably all redraft questions. I mean, we're watching main event draft, so I think just for the chat here, if you're asking questions from here on out, we're just going to assume they're redraft. If it's dynasty or something, you can just let us know in the comment.
Okay. My opinion on Jonathan Taylor in redraft, I think would probably be, I would be looking to trade him. Obviously, you have the time with those games missed, and then what the situation looks like after you have the whole situation with the physically unable to play list being cleared. I think there's even more. So if you're looking to move off from Taylor, perhaps he has more value now than he will, for a long time, unless he does return and start putting up numbers, at which point it probably would be the moment to move on from him. And like I said earlier, sometimes those slow starts can really kill your redraft team when you only have so long to recover.
Yeah, I think you got to figure out who your targets are, because the reason to get rid of Taylor is, it's not only the 4 games missed, does he potentially get traded then after he's activated? And then does he, like McCaffrey last year, does it take a week or 2 to calibrate? Does he end up getting double bye weeked, potentially, depending on when he comes back? And then, he could hold out longer if he is forced to stay in Indianapolis. He could hold out until the maximum time period that he would have to play to accrue a year. So I like just getting rid of it at this point. And looking at him as a sunk cost and getting what you can. The one guy that comes to mind that's still being drafted after Jonathan Taylor, even though his suspension is shorter, I kind of like the idea of just trying to trade Jonathan Taylor for Alvin Kamara. That's kind of, I moved him below. We talked about Cooper Kupp being moved below Devontae Adams in our rankings. When Taylor was placed on the PUP, I moved him below Alvin Kamara. I mean, to me, that makes sense. He's going to miss an additional game. We have far more questions about what that offense is going to look like when he comes back. And, while Kamara probably doesn't have the same athletic ability and burst, et cetera, as Taylor at this point, being a couple years older, a lot of mileage there. I mean, Derek Carr propped up Josh Jacobs to, legendary heights last year. So I'm not worried at all about Kamara being highly productive when he bursts back onto the scene. We now see toward the end of the 8th round, Dave, Antonio Gibson come off the board. People really starting to panic, it looks like, or reach at tight end. David Njoku goes a little earlier, I think, than he probably should be going. We see Tyler Higbee go here a couple rounds earlier than probably he needs to be going. I think Dave Waddle here, he was probably hell-bent on stacking tight end there and just took whichever tight end fell to him, I guess, in his rankings. Or maybe he thinks with the Kupp injury that Higbee, is a favorite for more targets, which is a reasonable take to have, but it's just arguable how much efficiency we'll see there. Yeah,
I was going to say, though, that the really interesting thing is what do things look like for Van Jefferson, especially if Cooper Kupp is not able to, start the season, because Van Jefferson is a player we've talked a lot about on this show. But we have a couple of questions in the chat. But one thing I wanted to get your opinion on, Curtis, especially for those podcast listeners that will be listening to the audio of this, with Jeff Wilson now landing on the IR. What do we do now? Because we've been going after pieces of that backfield. Now, how high do Raheem Mostert and a chain move up for you?
I mean, I think you take them both in like the 10th round. A chain was already kind of going in that 10th round.
Yep.
I've seen Mostert actually goes there at 8-12, just as we're talking about this. But I've seen Mostert commonly going in round 9 and 10, and commonly to me. And FFPC drafts and underdog drafts over the past couple of days. I think that's where he makes sense to go. It actually looks like a chain has not gone yet in this draft. So that might be a conversation that we could have, but there's still some guys that I like above him that I think figure for just as much upside early, maybe even early in the season instead of having to break into it. So, as we build our queue for this round, again, we're full of our flex spots and we're building our depth. And these next couple of players probably are either potentially going to be in our flex right away, or they're going to be, rotate through that flex. These next couple of players we're going to draft, we're planning on having to play them quite a bit.
Yep.
So Cortland Sutton, we took in one of our other main event squads in this round earlier this week. Brian Robinson, who we mentioned, is still hanging out. Dalton Kincaid as another tight end option who could potentially break out. He has a different bye week than Goddard. And, if he ends up being, I guess the interest there is if we're wrong on Gabe Davis being the number 2 and Kincaid ends up being the number 2, we'd be assured of having that guy. But it could also cause some frustration for us if they kind of go back and forth. Other players that are, on Sean's 0 RB list for this year, Jaylen Warren is hanging out in this area. Quentin Johnston, who we talked about a little bit earlier, Treylon Burks, I would have a lot of interest in. He goes just as I'm chatting about that there. But I think those are the players that I'm kind of interested in here, Dave. Anybody else you think that we should be considering?
I think that you've covered most of the players that I would actually all of the guys that I would be focused on here. We have a couple of targets later on in the draft that, I'm certainly paying attention to. I added one name to our queue that I won't disclose, Curtis, that, I'm thinking we leave there just in case there's a significant drop for him. So we can think about it. We also had a good question come in too here that I want to get to related to 1/2 PPR in a two-way trade. I don't know if you can bring that up on the screen for us.
I will have to. Oh, this one right here.
Yep. So the question is, 1/2 PPR got offered Cup/Mixon for Jacobs/Mike Williams.
Nah, I mean, I'll pass.
Yeah,
I'll pass on it right now. Half PPR diminishes Cup slightly anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, why would we take the risk at this point? Right. I mean, I think I would want, if I was if Mike Williams is like your wide receiver 2 or 3, I mean, drop down another level, try to trade like your wide receiver 4 here and you could counter, but I'm not going to give up. I don't think I'm going to give up those 2 players here. I mean, Jacobs is being drafted, commonly a round or 2, even depending on which platform, a round or 2 before Mixon. There's just not a reason for you to pay this premium with the uncertainty around Cup right now.
Yep. So I think that
4 picks remain, Dave. 4 picks remain. We've got some guys that are still in the queue here. We did lose Sutton.
Yep.
I'm wondering if we're going to see some. There goes Robinson. Man, I'd really been hoping that he would make it to us. I was getting pretty excited about that. Yep. I'm wondering if we're going to see some quarterbacks go off the board on these 2 squads just before us, or will they wait till round 10, knowing that our 111 and 112 squads already have the position covered. Just looking at some other players that we could get into our queue here for round 10, if we end up wanting to go a different position in round 9. I think Rashad Pennywatch has started, hasn't it?
Oh, certainly.
So
I didn't know that it ever stopped. I think it just perpetually carries through from draft to draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna have to consider him there. So Dalton Schultz goes. We have to assume that the manager at 112 is going to take either a tight end or a running back, or potentially 2 of either. here at this turn. So we need to be precise with which running back we prefer.
Yes.
I'm really excited about Rashad Penny and Jaylen Warren. And, do you have a strong take on one over the other?
I don't have a strong take over one over the other. I do think, though, that Penny is competing with two guys, whereas Warren's really just competing with one. If you're looking for upside, who has more? And if you're looking for a week-to-week option, who has more? I think I might come out more on the side of Jaylen Warren for those questions.
Yeah, we're going to take
you
Penny.
Love Penny, though.
We're taking Penny.
Okay.
we're taking Penny, and then if Warren gets back to us, we'll take him. Okay.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Yeah, I wanted to see if that was not a strong enough take for me. I like Warren. I do think Penny. So we've seen the Eagles, utilize guys with like projectable touches week to week to week. Whereas in that Pittsburgh offense, it remains to be seen. There was quite a bit of beat report activity over the past week clarifying that even though Warren got a fair amount of run in the preseason, that, Harris is still by far considered the team's one. It's not a 1A, 1B, So, I mean, it's possible they're just managing his ego there, so we don't really know. And Warren could come out and have 10 touches a game and we could be like, hey, we probably should have reversed the order on these guys.
Of course, Philadelphia, much more desirable offense. Oh, there goes the chain.
I think there's a chance he makes it. A chain goes first.
Yep.
And these drafts are like synced up perfectly now to where I'll probably just be on the clock simultaneously every single time. Yeah. So is there anybody else, do you have a thought to take Kincaid instead of Jaylen Warren here? Or like maybe a guy like Juju? Or you just want to stick with the running back position?
I don't necessarily feel the need to stick with the running back position. I do, though, think if I start to look ahead, Curtis, there's still a couple other running backs that I'd be okay kind of rounding out our running back group here that I think if we don't take this round, then we kind of miss out on. The idea of Kincaid certainly is interesting. We do already have one catcher, though, paired
Warren
with
goes
Allen.
there.
Okay,
so Warren goes
there. So I think you're looking at guys like Kadarius Toney, Romeo Doubs, Juju, maybe Rashad Bateman. T-Ryan was one of the running backs I was looking at. There's also McKinnon, who we took in another league, so I don't think we'd go there, or Tank Bigsby.
I
kind of like Pirine.
Yeah, I think I like Pirine too. As much as I would like to take Kincaid, I just added a different tight end with the same bye week that I like almost as much.
Right.
That I think could make it to us in the 11th round. So let's take Pirine. I feel pretty good about our 4 deep at running back there. And we can take we've got a couple of veteran targets that we like to take it at wide receiver that I think will, continue to kind of round out this team. So I'm flipping back over to my FPC. I'll be back with you mentally here in about 20 seconds, Dave.
Okay. And I just rifled through some underdog picks. It is a crazy time of the year. At any given moment, both Curtis and I combined are like collectively on the clock in probably like 100+ leagues. So we now have at each position, just to level set here, quarterback, the top 3 players on the board, according to FFPC, are Dak Prescott, Anthony Richardson, and Daniel Jones. At running back, you have Zach Charbonnet, Jerick McKinnon, Tank Bigsby. Wide receivers look like Kadarius Toney, Romeo Doubs, Juju Smith-Schuster, Rashad Bateman, Nico Collins. And at tight end, Dalton Kincaid, Sam Laporta, Chega Kwonkwo, Cole Kmet, Juwan Johnson. Our team currently consists of A.J. Brown, Devontae Adams, Josh Allen, Travis Etienne, J.K. Dobbins, Dallas Goedert, Gabe Davis, Brandon Cooks, Rashad Penny, Samaje Perine. So, oh my gosh, somebody in the comments, 24-hour stream. I mean, I think it could be possible to do with the amount of leagues that we're in.
I mean, yeah, it would be possible just to go back to back to back. It would take 12 drafts.
Yep.
I'm not sure that, I guess we would have to flip to some up all night live drafts on DK or underdog. But Dave, I think I'm about 5 years older than I'd prefer to be to actually attempt that.
Yes, definitely.
At this point, it sounds way better in theory than in actuality.
It does too. Plus, I would have a lot of site related things that I'd be trying to do in the background there. Nonetheless, though, it is an intriguing idea. As I start to look at our team, Curtis, I am definitely at the point now where I like the balance that we have, and I'm going to start scouring for wide receivers that we can add to our queue here. As you mentioned, there are some guys that managed to get onto the back end of a lot of our rosters. We'll drop some of those guys in. If you look at the makeup right now of the wide receivers that we do have with Brown, Adams, Davis, and Cooks, I think we are a little bit older at that position than we tend to be. For you, is that a significant consideration right now, where you'd like to inject some youth?
I mean, maybe. I mean, I don't want to really reach on it. I think that we continue to just be strategic. I think that AJ Brown and Devontae Adams are just such overwhelming presences there that, I mean, we're just looking for guys that, we can plug into those flex spots. And depending on the roles of, Penny and Pirine here, respectively, I mean, Davis and Cooks, they might be situational, plays. And I think anybody else that we would draft, would be a situational play. And there's some younger players available that could make it all the way back to us, like, Kadarius Toney, Nico Collins, Marvin Mims. Those are the types of players that we could take that have a little bit of youth. But if we just want, to go after the volume, we can, maybe Juju Smith-Schuster falls to us. Somebody like OBJ is a way to get into that Ravens offense, since we didn't take Mark Andrews at the top of the draft. And we've also got other veterans that we could hit, a round or two from now with, Adam Thielen. We think he's going to lead that Panthers team in targets on the younger side, kind of in that same range. A guy that Blair and Sean both like a lot, and Rashee Rice in Kansas City. So there's plenty of wide receivers to still be excited about, but I like our quartet that we started with so well. I guess I'm just not really super concerned about it. I think we throw some darts, and if they hit, great. If not, we replace them on the waiver wire.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the other important note here that we talked about when we did this last time too, is how a major component, especially of these main event leagues, is just being willing to dedicate yourself to constantly reviewing the waiver wire, making the plays that you need to make. And I think also when you're building out these rosters, it's important to realize that you have access to the waiver wire and think about how you might be able to utilize it while you're building out your team. So a couple of interesting picks here. After Dalton Kincaid, you have Sam Laporta going as the tight end 14 here, followed by Nico Collins. Then we do see Kadarius Toney go off of the board. I feel like that's a little bit earlier than I've seen Sam Laporta going lately. Curtis, does that match up with what you're seeing?
He's got fans. I do think that usually Kincaid coming off the board is the warning shot for the Laporta fan to go ahead and take him.
Yep.
But I've seen him last till the 12th round. So, it does feel a little bit early. This is a team that wanted to build around tight end anyway. We saw Mark Andrews at the top here. So I think the thought here for this team drafting out of the 104 is that, maybe I can in the second half of the year, maybe I can overwhelm the competition by having, two tight ends that are central figures in the offense. Detroit, if they do nothing, it's looking pretty open. It's looking pretty open after Amon-Ra St. Brown. So if Laporta can really, master the things that the team's asking him to do and earn Jared Goff's trust when the moments matter, I mean, he could be one of these 80, 90 target tight ends as a rookie. So I don't mind it at all. A guy that we had in our queue, Dave, Tyler Algier, goes at the 11-1. Not that he would have been a need. He would have been a little bit more of a luxury, but potentially could have been just finished at running back had he made it to us there. Juju's still hanging out there as the number one target getter in New England. I really don't mind him. It's not as sexy as, one of these rookies or second year breakout type players, but I don't think I care. We're just going to draft the best guys.
Yep. I think also if you look at that depth chart too, right now, one of the variables, Tyquan Thornton a little bit banged up. Of course, you have Kendrick Bourne, Devontae Parker there, but I think it certainly sets up, and the two tight ends, of course, Gesicki dealing with some health concerns. I think it certainly sets up that you could see a significant amount of volume for Juju. And as we've talked about before, I do expect us to see a bit more of a functioning offense there in New England. this year. As a result of that, Juju in this range, of course, he just went, looks like a player that could be in the conversation to get into your lineup every week. Maybe he won't actually make it in every week, but for a player in the 11th at wide receiver, I think that there's some use to that. Unfortunately, though, he's now gone. That said, though, we do have some backup options at wide receiver. We can start to talk about. We have Josh Allen at quarterback. From a roster construction perspective, Curtis, do you think we have any interest in this main event league in adding a second backup, or not a second backup, in adding a backup so that we have 2 QBs and it erases some of the concern that you might have about having depth if something were to happen to Allen?
Yeah, it's the conversation that we had in our draft the other day. If we're going to take a second guy, it would be a guy not to like cover Allen's bye week. I mean, his bye week's not till week 13. We would be taking a guy that just purely for the upside that we would think has a range of outcomes to be a QB1, even though we're taking him late. So that way, in the event that Josh Allen were to go down, if this guy's ceiling projection did hit, we would still have a competitive squad. So we've talked a lot about the Commanders' offense. So we might go hunting there for a quarterback. If we select a second quarterback, but with that late bye week for Josh Allen, as long as not like every team is taking a QB2, we can feel comfortable going to the waiver wire. But if we start to see like a lot of the teams take a QB2, that's another thing that is kind of usually a tip that you got to pay attention to, that you could get blocked out. Because then once the season starts, people start covering bye weeks. Maybe, they don't see a lot of other value on the waiver wire. They start to play defense a little bit. I mean, these are highly competitive leagues, and you got to be, kind of ready for anything here. So two picks away, I think I'm gonna order how I would want to take these guys.
Yep,
those are the 2 that I want. I just moved them in the queue. What do you think?
Sorry, am I looking at the top of the queue?
Yep, I just reordered.
I do like that. One of those guys I had dropped in earlier. I find it a super interesting play here. I actually, if you think it's possible, I would like to just smash things in that order.
Yes, and we want to be strategic and take this tight end first, because the manager at 112 does not have a tight end. Yep. So we've got to get through 2 more picks here, but at the wide receiver, I think we've got 2 tight ends and 2 wide receivers that I'm cool taking here.
Yep.
If I zoom out and look at our full queue, so just 7 seconds left for this pick, and then we'll be on deck. So let's see. I think we might get a timeout here from our auto drafting manager, and we did. He times out.
Get stuck with OBJ.
He gets stuck with OBJ. Yeah,
gotta love it when a player that you would have no interest in taking gets auto drafted.
I mean, you should have just taken Dak Prescott to get the early season starts, and then
right. I mean, well, I was about to mention that. I think that there's 2 quarterbacks that are left that a lot of people would still feel comfortable with as their starters, and one was Dak, the other was Geno Smith. So we're going to be starting to get into true backup territory. All right,
so Tyjae Spears goes. Yeah, Tyjae Spears goes a pick in front of us. I want to take Cole Kmet here. I think we could. I mean, honestly, he could end up being an every week flex for us if Justin Fields takes that step forward that we've talked about. DJ Moore is the one for sure, but it's debatable who the 2 in Chicago is going to be. And they just games out of those get paid. So. I mean, Cole Kmet got paid too. So let's go there. And I like that too, because it's going to frustrate that manager on the turn. He's kicking himself right now.
Yeah, because he still does not have a tight end.
He's going to take Juwan Johnson with one of these picks. I think
this is one of those reasons, Curtis, why I like picking on the corners, because it just made us really able to focus in on make the right decision there, going for Kmet.
That manager has Fields too. He's so mad right now. He's so mad.
Yeah.
And we didn't put Kmet out of spite. I thought he was the best guy on the board, but the more I look at it, the happier I am that we pulled the trigger there.
Yeah. So, I wish I had an excited sound effect other than applause. I'm going to get one in there for the regular season. We did have a question coming in, which is, will you guys be doing the GLSP show again this year? Our plan is to definitely try and do that.
We're going to make some changes, Dave. We're making some changes to our GLSP content. So Dave he's the engineer behind it. I mean, he's running the show with our GLSP every week in terms of creating the data. But I'm actually going to write our projections content for the site week to week, and then we will plan to hopefully actually even stream that show most weeks. Yep. Provided that our schedule allows. Dave, I'm on the clock at 9:11 in the other league, so I'm going to make a pick here, and then we'll.
Yep. So
we'll recalibrate.
This round, we're seeing some veteran wide receivers go, if you will. We saw Adam Thielen, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Jacoby Myers. The pick before us was just made. It was Juwan Johnson. Yep. Now, in our queue here, Curtis, we have a wide receiver. We got a couple of wide receivers here, mixture of youth and veterans. Is the player at the top of the queue?
Yeah.
Did you just move? You just introduced him over the guy underneath him?
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to. So the two guys we're talking about are Marvin Mims and Jameson Williams. We're not going to take Jameson Williams over Marvin Mims with that lengthy suspension in this high dollar event. If he continues to slide, that's fine. But Mims has a chance to really assert himself while Judy's out potentially these first couple weeks. Everybody at the site loves Mims. We think he's underrated. I love adding him here. And then, we could come back to Williams, next round if he's still there, because then he would truly just be a lottery ticket. I feel like this wide receiver 5 that we're selecting here is still a player that we need to, probably consider as part of our mix. And, when speaking of the GLSP, he may be a player that, we're on a matchup basis taking, starting every once in a while, rather.
Yeah, certainly. I think there's been a lot of excitement for Mims. I know you're going back now, maybe more than a month, but Sean wrote a piece talking about some of these wide receivers to go after, in the later rounds that have good mixture of a lot of the things that we look for. And Marvin Mims was one of those players. So to level set here, our wide receiver core consists of AJ Brown, Devontae Adams, Gabe Davis, Brandon Cooks, and Marvin Mims. Josh Allen is our quarterback. At tight end, we have Dallas Goedert and Cole Kmet. And our running backs are Travis Etienne, J.K. Dobbins, Rashad Penny, and Samaje Perine. So I think that we're probably good.
Squad's nasty.
Crazy.
Squad's nasty. I like this one, man. It makes a difference. We had Lamar Jackson on our 111 squad the other day. But we had Evan Ingram rather than Dallas Goedert. And it was a different look up at the top as well. We went with Devontae Adams instead of Garrett Wilson here for a veteran presence. And I think the biggest difference between these two squads is actually the presence of J.K. Dobbins as a stronger RB2. On that other squad, I think we waited until round 7 and we grabbed DeAndre Swift as our RB2 after starting the draft with Travis Etienne. So this team definitely more balanced across the positions, but not in a way that I feel has robbed us of upside down the depth chart. With Penny and Perine, that's a nice mixture of veterans who also have a chance to have standalone value, and then their contingent value is just very high. Rashad Penny's contingent value is as high as any backup in the league. If he ends up getting to just run the show in Philly, I mean, he's going to be a league winner there out of the 9th round. And then the contingent value of Samaje Perine. I mean, we know Sean Payton has always loved to run his offenses through the running back, a long, proud history of featuring, many different running backs in New Orleans. And so, we're pretty excited. They really committed themselves to Perine with that contract and have talked about him having a 1B role there and maybe even being featured more heavily at the beginning of the season with Javonte Williams still recovering. Now at our wide receiver positions here, I think I almost would say Brandon Cooks is kind of more of our wide receiver 3, even though we drafted him number 4. But if Gabe Davis hits, I mean, all of a sudden this team is just, this team looks like $1 million to me, because we got that Davis stack with Josh Allen. I find the hole, man. Find the hole in our starting lineup because I don't see it. I'm really liking this. Really, really liking this squad.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel good about this team. And I think the makeup, like you said, in comparison to the one we drafted earlier in the week is very different because of the decision to go with Allen where we did. Like you said, it's kind of elevated our running backs. I don't feel like we've suffered too much at wide receiver. So I like the way this has come together. We got in on Goddard at the right time. If you look across the board at any of these other constructions from the teams that we're drafting with it that stand out to you, there's ones that you like, Curtis?
Yeah, let's take a minute to assess here. Where's our primary competition going to come from? Obviously the team drafting right next to us at that 112, pretty in pink, kind of went with a modified hero RB build, choosing to build this team around Ramondre Stevenson. I would like that team more if they had invested earlier at tight end. I think that's a gap there. If I'm going to go with a hero RB or zero RB build, I really like to have the elite quarterback and the higher end tight end. I know that there's not very many elite tight ends, but having a high end tight end. Now, that being said, if you're going to wait till round 12 to draft a tight end, Juwan Johnson is your guy. I mean, I think you did pretty well. Juwan Johnson reminds me of a player, a couple years ago, when Sean and I finished 12th in this event. We had Dalton Schultz that we had waited on forever to take and ended up playing him. And he was just kind of like whatever, he's going to be, there's no reason why he wouldn't have a lot of targets in the offense, I guess, but just not a lot of buzz around him. Juwan Johnson actually top 3 in the position last year in receiving touchdowns, and now they get the quarterback upgrade. So, it's fine. It's fine. I don't know if I love the RB2 players there that are in the mix. So I think it's going to be a solid team on the strength of those top 6 draft picks, but I think I like our squad better. If I look the other direction at the 110, I also think I prefer our squad there on the strength of our quarterbacks and tight ends versus the other squads, quarterbacks and tight ends. I don't think there's an appreciable difference between what we did at wide receiver and running back. I think it's eye of the beholder between these two squads. Let's look at the other end of the draft, though. I kind of like what Team 1 has done here. Even though they went really ballsy with the Jamar Chase selection, they get an elite tight end and Darren Waller. They stacked Jamar Chase by grabbing Joe Burrow. James Cook, Raheem Mostert, Khalil Herbert, and Tyler Algier. Those are all players that we would consider, part of a zero RB build. I think this team was executed. It's a very well executed zero RB draft. You could argue that it's not true zero RB since they took James Cook at the 5-1, but it certainly looks and feels like a zero RB team. That team really stands out to me as one that's going to be pretty tough. I'm not going to look forward to playing that squad. And then Dave, the other team that I like is I like Team 5. If I could only just upgrade their tight end, I kind of wish that team had taken, I don't know. I guess I don't know the spot that they could have taken one. They kind of got boxed out, but maybe if they had even just taken Hawkinson instead of Higgins in the 3rd round, that's just an interesting team. It has some pretty good balance and, looks like it'll be pretty tough. Do you agree with those selections, or is there another team that you were looking at that you're worried about?
No, I think that I'm inclined to agree with what you laid out there. This has been a fun one in that there's a couple of different types of builds, and things have played out very differently than the draft that we were in the other night. One of the challenges with these is we very often are able to leave a draft feeling pretty good about things. And, I often wonder if everybody else out there is feeling the same way that we do. But, that's definitely what makes these things so fun. So we should probably start thinking, we got a comment here. Team 7 is the best. So that's the team with Robinson, Mahomes, Allen, Jones, Lockett, Kirk, Evans. That is pretty solid.
It's a pretty solid team. Depends on what you think of Aaron Jones, I think. And Njoku. Those are 2 pivot players in that roster. I got to make a pick on my other squad here real quick, Dave.
Yep. So I think that if we're starting to look at the queue for this team here, I'm still largely interested in wide receivers. Maybe we would build in one more running back. If you look at the board, you got Hubbard, Singletary, Ty Chandler, Kareem Hunt, Zamir White, Deuce Vaughn, Jerome Ford, Kyron Williams. At wide receiver, the options are Tyler Boyd, Jonathan Mingo, Darnell Mooney, Jaden Reed, Rondale Moore, Isaiah Hodgins. So I think that you're at the point, it's hard to get very excited about any particular player. You just kind of need to look at your team and think about what its needs are. So we regrouped a couple of minutes ago on the positions that we have. I still think that I'd like to see a little bit more depth for us at wide receiver. So where does that come from? The players that I'd be looking at here are, I do have some level of interest in trying to pick one of these guys on the Giants potentially. You do have guys like MVS hanging out, on an high-powered offense. I do not believe that we have any access to the Chiefs yet, so that does make him somewhat interesting. KJ Osborne, you could almost consider. He had a pretty great pace last year. He plays in a good offense too. I know he's the third option there. Just kind of tossing out some names. Do you have anybody that you have your eye on though, Curtis? Oh yeah. Oh, I
do. Okay, I just made my pick in my other draft. I like the comment about MVS, but I think we probably need to swing bigger for a player that has, and if I don't think that MVS can probably be, I mean, unless Travis Kelce gets injured, there's just no way he's going to be the number one on the Chiefs offense. And I think he would still have some work to do to get in front of Sky Moore. So he's probably the third there. And the thing with the Chiefs is the third hasn't typically been projectable. It's almost kind of gone, got a guy. So, he would only be a spot starter for us. Jalen Hyatt actually, I think, has a chance to earn wide receiver 1 duties in New York. And he's a big play guy. So if we're forced into playing him, he has that overlap with MVS. They're both kind of big play players, but Hyatt could end up as that number 2 target getter behind Darren Waller, I think, a little bit easier than MVS could find himself in that situation for the Chiefs. If I'm looking at the rest of the options here for us, we're covered on the depth. I mean, we could go with a quarterback 2 here if you wanted to get a high-end guy like Geno Smith. But probably Geno goes right as we say that. I kind of like Hyatt here, unless you have another guy that you're focused in on.
Nope. I think Hyatt fits kind of the mold of what I would be looking for here. So let's go ahead and take Hyatt. After we do that, we will then have a total of 6 wide receivers. We have the 4 running backs. I think that we're set at tight end. As far as the quarterbacks go, we might have 1 or 2 guys later on in the draft to talk about. Are you thinking that we still stick at wide receiver, or is there potentially a running back that you have your eye on?
It's probably a little early for these guys, but we're also to the point of the draft that kind of just take who you want on your squad, depending on your build, because the ADP, like the calipers around these players are set pretty wide at this point in the draft. So some running backs that we would maybe consider here over the course of the next 3 rounds, Chuba Hubbard behind an oft injured Miles Sanders, I think, and what should be an improved Carolina offense. He kind of stands out as an option to me here. And then there's another guy that I added that I thought maybe would be available at that 15-16 turn. I think if I was making this selection, I'm probably going with Chuba Hubbard. The honorable mention would be Irv Smith to get a piece of that Cincinnati offense as a potential streamer at in this tight end premium format. So those would probably be my 2 guys here, Dave.
Okay. I'm going to be entirely honest. I had to make a pick elsewhere and I missed most of that. So I'm just going to trust what you said is where we should go.
It's either Chuba or Irv Smith. So
I'd say Chuba then, I think.
Yeah. Let's go with Chuba, assuming that he doesn't go here. We still got to wait for this 12 spot manager to make a selection.
Okay.
And he takes Tyler Conklin. I like Chuba here. Just another guy that has got contingent value that we were talking about with Penny and Pirine, but we get him 4 rounds later. So team is rounding out nicely.
I am going to have to go in a couple of minutes. Should we have a high level discussion here about my thoughts on the rest of the team or where we need to go?
Sure. Why don't you talk to me about some guys that you want to have in the queue, and we can make sure that we execute the end of this draft here.
Guys in the queue. I think Josh Kelly could be a running back. I'll add them as I'm going to look at later. These are going to be guys that we've talked about a lot. I would be curious to think if you think that Ty Chandler has any utility on a team such as this. Those are kind of the running backs. At wide receiver, I had mentioned KJ Osborne. I don't know, maybe he's someone to toss in there. I think Michael Gallup could be relatively interesting. And then as I continue to look down the list even later, we've already got the Giants wide receivers. Puka Nacua could be kind of interesting. Then even like really late, guys like Quez Watkins that could find their way into although we already have a couple of Philly players. Those guys get a little bit interesting, but there's not anybody that I'm super in love with that we have to take.
Yeah. Rich Billieu says Ty Chandler ain't going to make it back to you guys. Yeah, probably not. We saw a little bit of a miniature run go there after we took Chuba. So we'll see. I mean, he may not, but again, I think with the 5 deep that we've got, I don't feel desperate to get a 6th. I love the Josh Kelly call. I also added Dave for later on Sean Tucker in Tampa Bay, and then Kyron Williams, who I think actually is going to have standalone value. It just depends on if the Rams feel like they're teetering on the edge of disaster again, like last season now with the cup questions. I did add Sam Howell as a QB2 option for late if we wanted to go that direction. He would be the guy, and unless somebody like Kenny Pickett or Russell Wilson lasts really, really late, we could potentially go that direction. From a kicker and defense perspective, defense, we missed out on New Orleans last time, but we highlighted on our stream that they were a team that we could almost set and forget for a lot of weeks. So I wouldn't even mind as early maybe as round 16 taking them and just not having to worry about that one position on the waiver wire. We could stay a little bit more focused on streaming the kickers or picking up other players that emerge as difference makers in their offenses. And then at the kicker position, there is some interest. I think the opening game, Dave, is Kansas City versus Detroit this year. And in this event, you do have the option of deciding if you want to take the score of the Thursday night player or not. And so I do have some interest, not necessarily in being first to draft kicker with Harrison Butker, but maybe taking Detroit's kicker and Riley Patterson. And then if he doesn't have a great game, we drop him and pick somebody else up for Sunday morning.
Okay. I mean, I think that all sounds good to me. I trust you to man the helm here as I have to sign off to go get my daughter from the bus.
All right.
Fun hanging out with everybody in the chat. Best of luck to you this season. And Curtis, I'm just going to leave the audio recording. I'm going to mute my mic though, and I'll catch up with you later. All
right. Sounds good.
All
and
right,
this will of course post on the podcast channel tomorrow. I'm going to go ahead and hit a couple other questions as Dave logs off here, and we're going to execute the rest of this draft. Appreciate you guys hanging out with me here. A couple people just demanding that this team drafts Cade Otton. I mean, we'll see. Dave's a Cade Otton guy. I mean, it's possible. There's some other tight ends that I like that would be available late as well. I like the idea of the contingent value of Isaiah Likely. Hayden Hurst and Hunter Henry, I think, are going to be featured in their offenses. And so those are also players that we can consider sneaking in here if we want to avoid having to go to the waiver wire in the event that we would lose Goddard or Kmet to injury. Let's see here. So we're rounding out the 14th round. Correctly projected, Rich Billieu, that Ty Chandler would not make it back to us. He does not make it back to us. We have the rare Clyde Edwards-Helaire draft pick in the 14th round. I've seen a wide range of outcomes for Ty Chandler across all of the high stakes drafts that I've been doing. And I mean, he's often even still going undrafted in best ball drafts. So that's a conviction pick there at 14-12, I actually think. I am going to be on the clock in my Fantasy Pros Championship draft, which is also going on from the 11th spot. I do have some overlap on that squad with this team. Some of the common players selected are Travis Etienne, Rashad Penny, Gabe Davis, and Cole Kmet. I will show that team here in a few minutes once I have a chance to make a couple of these picks, but I actually went with a quarterback stack of Dak Prescott and Anthony Richardson on that team. If you remember earlier in the stream, I mentioned that I went CeeDee Lamb in the first round. So that's the thinking there. So I've just been placed on the clock in that draft. I'm looking at the tight end position. and we're in the 13th round, as I mentioned. Jake Ferguson is an interesting player that could get quite a bit of run in the Dallas offense and would stack up nicely with Dak and CeeDee Lamb. If I wanted to go that direction, some of the other players available in the 13th round there, Jalen Hyatt, Rashee Rice, Jaden Reed, and then at the running back position, it's pretty much been cleared out already. So I do think I am going to take Ferguson as my tight end 2 there, and then we'll see what makes it back around the curve to me. Back to our main event draft here, and we've got Josh Kelly at the 1501. That is a player that Dave and I had mentioned for this squad, and so that's a bit disappointing to see him get cleared out. Maybe we will pull the trigger a little bit earlier on Kyren Williams than we had discussed, just to make sure we get one more running back onto this team. As we see Justin Tucker, the kicker dam may be busted now. We'll have to see what happens there with that position. Sometimes that first one goes and then you start to see the dam opening. Let's see here. Got a couple more comments here. Was in a draft last night with a bunch of Taurus drafters. Oh boy, that was fun. Got a ridiculous team. Yeah, I think in the Fantasy Pros Championship, especially, you can get a little bit more creative. I think the main event, it's harder to get those kind of crazy pure teams. Can't happen. Kyren Williams or Ingram, I think are both options there for us, Rich, as you mentioned. So Hunter Henry goes. Our queue is starting to get cleared out here. I think the value guys are very apparent. Other players that we could consider, we still do not have a quarterback 2 on this team. And we do have Marvin Mims. So the idea of maybe taking Russell Wilson as our 2. I've kind of been up and down the Russell Wilson, Sean Payton roller coaster over the course of the summer. But, when we talk about like rookie scouting, right, from a dynasty perspective and early in the fantasy year in the wintertime each season, it's like, talk to me about what a player can do. Don't necessarily talk about the weaknesses. And I know last year was really, really bad for Russell Wilson. It really couldn't have gone worse. There was injuries in the offense. The offensive line was poor, and he just did not deliver after that crazy, crazy draft package that Denver put together to bring him into town from Seattle. But things have really settled now. He has one of the all-time great quarterback whisperers and really offensive minds in Sean Payton. And the Broncos invested a ton, and the Haas is up on the line. So this is a vastly different team than Russell Wilson was commanding last season. And so, I think, potentially would have some interest there. Again, we're not going to take a QB2 on this team unless we think it's a player that we could continue our $1 million journey with in the event that Josh Allen goes down. And when you look at like the ceiling scenarios for a player like Russell Wilson and the idea of this team that we're drafting hitting its ceiling, it certainly makes sense to put Russell Wilson with Marvin Mims, because if Russ is having a great season, Mims is probably usable as well. And so now we are on deck. We've seen a run on defenses. So yeah, I think I'm pretty interested. I think I've talked myself into the idea of Russell Wilson with one of these turn picks. I don't feel the need to take him with our first one because the team at the 12 spot has Fields and Jared Goff. So I think I'm going to go a different direction first. We can either go with New Orleans team defense because we've got that run on the defenses now. Round 15 is just a little earlier than I like to do it. So that, but I'm really looking at these picks as basically being back to back. And if I think that the quarterback is not going to be touched at the turn, then I think you can consider going with the defense. I think that I can count on one of my 2 targets between Kyren Williams and Sean Tucker making it to me back in round 17. Especially if I think about Tucker, I can envision him making it there. So I am going to go ahead and take the New Orleans defense here. Again, a little earlier than I typically like to take them in these big events, but they have a late bye week in week 11. And really, I could see myself setting and forgetting this squad for 10 straight weeks. There's really only 1 or 2 matchups that you kind of scratch your head and say, I don't know about that one. They really have a nice schedule from a fantasy perspective early. So if you're listening to this stream and you're wondering who should I target in my redraft at the defense position, you certainly won't have to go 5 rounds before the end of your draft to take New Orleans. But, hey, not every redraft league is like the main event in terms of the way the waivers are managed. So we'll force the issue here now for the 112 position. Will he feel like he needs to take a defense with one of these picks? We don't think he's going to take Russell Wilson, certainly. And if, even if he did, I guess I wouldn't really care too much because I think I'm going to be able to get Sam Howell with one of our last picks in the event that Wilson goes. Do I ever get good name vibes? That's an awesome question from Diego. Good name vibes, man. Sean Tucker feels like a good football name. I don't know. I mean, yeah, maybe. I feel like there are a lot of good football names. I mean, probably one of the all-time great football names is also one of the all-time great football players. When you just think about Joe Montana, is there a cooler football name than Joe Montana? And for him to be an all-time great is pretty cool too. Dan Marino. I mean, in some ways, it's like the players that end up being great have the great names, just because you get used to saying them and seeing the highlights, and even player names can turn into verbs. Randy Moss, we still talk about, he hasn't been in the league for years. We talk about players getting mossed in the end zone. That's an interesting topic, probably a good podcast topic for another day. Rich says, I'm going to take a look at New Orleans now. Thanks. Hadn't thought about it till you talked it up. Duke Johnson kept getting drafted for years because of his name. Yeah. And Ian Hartitz, I think still talking about freeing Duke Johnson, even though he's not, I don't think he's currently in the league, or if he is absolutely buried. So Deion Jackson goes in the 12 hole. That's a name that you're going to see up your boards a little bit more moving forward because of the Jonathan Taylor suspension. Zach Moss probably going to get the run if he comes back from his broken arm. If not, I expect Deion Jackson and Evan Hull to compete for touches, along with Anthony Richardson, of course, running the ball quite a bit as the quarterback there. We're back on the clock. I really kind of got myself talked into Russell Wilson, but there's still a lot of quarterbacks left, man. A lot of good quarterbacks. I think even though he's far less likely to have a meaningful season, I just don't want to have to run to the waiver wire to get a running back if I don't have to. And so I'm going to take Kyren Williams here. So Kyren Williams has really been getting a lot of run in Los Angeles over the course of the preseason. Cam Akers is going to figure heavily into that offense, but the beat reports, there's been a kind of a steady drum beat from the beats about Kyren Williams being pretty darn involved in this offense. And he slid far later in the draft than I ever would have thought that he would. For those of you that have been following me for several years, you'll remember the Dynasty Command Center podcast that I did with Travis May for several years. And Travis was a huge Kyren Williams fan. And, for him to drop where he did, given his size, speed, and production, it was pretty interesting. So it's cool to see him hanging around the league. Maybe he gets his chance here a couple years into his career. DJ Chark and Tank Dell go here. Man, Tank Dell, it's hard not to root for him. Glad to see him popping in the preseason. So we start to see some teams selecting their QB2s. Derek Carr goes there. I'm going to flip back over to my FPC draft where I'll be on the clock in round 15 as well. That draft going a little bit quicker. I'm actually about caught up here to where I am in this draft. I will have to show that draft board to you guys here in a second as well on the stream. I know the stream's all about the main event, but this other draft's going for $1 million too. It's just a $350 entry rather than a $2,000 entry there. But this is a pretty nice and deep squad here as well. So on the clock in the 15th round in that other draft, I can really go any direction. It's a highly balanced team. I already have 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends. So I'm really just looking at running back, wide receiver, and tight end there. I think I like Hunter Henry for the value. I talked about him as being a potentially high volume tight end. I'm going to take him there in that other draft. Kenny Pickett. So now these quarterbacks are going in this main event draft. Man, we might get a situation where Marquez Valdes-Scantling makes it all the way back to us in round 17. Dave was talking about him, I think, back when we took Jalen Hyatt in the 13th. So I think he would be pretty happy if we end up taking MVS on the squad. He had mentioned wanting to get a piece of that Kansas City Chiefs offense. So kind of zeroing in on MVS, Sean Tucker, and Sam Howell for the next round. So if anybody's watching this board here, you can root for 2 of those 3 players to be available when our pick comes back around. Flipping back over to my Fantasy Pros Championship draft, Darnell Mooney, Donovan Peoples-Jones. I mean, these are the quality of players we're talking about now at the running back position. Evan Hull. I mean, it's really cleared out actually that this room has been far more aggressive on running backs over in this other draft than our main event draft has been. I kind of like the idea of Darnell Mooney is way, way, way past his ADP if I got in a spot to need to start him. We took Cole Kmet actually in both of these drafts, but there's a chance, Mooney comes back fully healthy and, he was actually pretty productive, kind of sneaky fantasy value 2 years ago. And if he regains that form with the Justin Fields, who has taken a step forward, that would obviously be pretty meaningful to have him way down there on your bench. Rich was yelling at me to take Donovan Peoples-Jones here in the chat. I like Donovan Peoples-Jones. There's nothing wrong with that, but Cedric Tillman has some skill overlap there. And, I think those 2 are going to be kind of splitting snaps by halfway through the season. I think Cedric Tillman is probably a better player overall than Donovan Peoples-Jones. That being said, I do have quite a bit of DPJ in best ball, Rich, so you'd be happy to know that. I'm just not I'm not going his way in these managed roster leagues too often. Zamir White, Chase Brown, a couple more 0 RB favorites. Chase Brown has the inside track to the contingent value. If Joe Mixon went down, I think he would be the 1-for-1 replacement to Joe Mixon. However, I think Chris Evans probably has, the third down duties either way. So you got to kind of keep that in mind. Zamir White was far more interesting, a week and a half ago before Josh Jacobs had showed up back in town. But, if you think Jimmy G can keep this Las Vegas team competitive, then, I'm not sure Josh Jacobs can run back all of the touch volume that he had in 2022 again this year. So maybe there's a place for White. He was, really kind of unimpressive in his rookie campaign. Wan'Dale Robinson coming back from the ACL and that really crowded New York Giants offense. That's an interesting pick. You'll see him go anywhere in these last 5 rounds to even potentially undrafted. That's kind of a conviction pick there. Jordan Love, Michael Gallup. There goes Russell Wilson. So that dream has died. But that's okay because we had, like we said, Sam Howell's a bailout option here for us as a QB2. And we still got Sean Tucker. So I think those are our 2 guys. The chat was rooting for Cade Otton. So, we'll have to see if he makes an appearance on this squad. And then I think our round 20 pick, we've already got planned as Riley Patterson to take advantage of the FFPC rules regarding the Thursday night football game the first week of the season. Okay. Another question from the chat here as we're marching towards our pick in the 17th round of this draft. Speaking of Cedric Tillman, do you have a strong take of Cedric Tillman versus Puka Nacua in Los Angeles? Yeah, I mean, I do actually have a pretty strong take. I mean, Tillman landed in a much better spot with a much better quarterback. I think I can understand maybe leaning the way of Nacua in Los Angeles because of the, relative difficulty of path to target share early on. I mean, Cleveland's wide receiver room is much more talented, and Tillman is going to start out as that 4th option in the wide receiver room. And then they also have David Njoku, so he's pretty far down the list. But I think Deshaun Watson, is a more talented, higher ceiling guy than Matthew Stafford at this point in their careers. And Cedric Tillman, I mean, we're talking about a day 2 pick with size and speed. What Donovan Peoples-Jones has done over the past couple of years, I mean, I think Tillman can do and more. I actually think Tillman was drafted as a hedge on Amari Cooper. They can part ways next year. Elijah Moore is going to be that inside / move receiver for the Browns. And I think they're tied up to David Njoku moving forward. So Tillman actually, I think, could become the X when Amari Cooper leaves. So both from a redraft perspective and from a dynasty perspective, I prefer Tillman. Hopefully I answered your question there, Diego. Gus Edwards and Evan McPherson come off the board, as does Isaiah Likely and KJ Osborne. Man, you guys didn't root hard enough. Sean Tucker goes off the board, and Washington defense goes off the board. Washington defense with a great first week matchup there. And we're on the clock. So I think this is the spot. If I'm looking at the quarterbacks, we saw 4 quarterbacks come off the board since our last pick. I've got Brock Purdy as the only quarterback available in front of Sam Howell at this point. So we are going to go ahead and take Sam Howell. If you haven't listened into the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast or other RotoViz shows all off season, or read any of our content at rotoviz.com, I mean, we all love Sam Howell. I mean, I think he's a great, if you're going to take 2 quarterbacks in your fantasy draft this year, he's a guy that you got to take a look at. He rushed for 700-800 yards in a single college season at North Carolina. I think he's really one of these. He's not going to be Justin Fields rushing for 1,100 yards, but he could. I really think he could rush for 600 to 700 yards. He would have kind of, when you think about how much Daniel Jones did last season, I think that is within Sam Howell's range of outcomes if he can hold on to this starting job all season. So we are back on the clock. Josh Reynolds and Jacksonville defense go. So now we're just looking for some value darts. We've got our round 20 kicker that we're going to have to take. I've got Rondale Moore from a wide receiver perspective. There's not really any running back sticking out. If I look at the tight end position, I think I'm actually going to take Michael Mayer here. A lot of interest in Dalton Kincaid and Sam Laporta from a rookie tight end perspective, but Michael Mayer actually the most well-rounded prospect in the draft. Very little being written about him, but we've got Devontae Adams on this team, and beyond him, we talked about it earlier on the stream. Actually, I think I said Michael Mayer's name, an hour and a half ago at the top of the draft when we were talking about that squad. Jacoby Myers is the number 2. I mean, I don't see Myers doing any more than he did in New England last season. So, Mayer could really be an interesting piece toward the second half of the year. We're not going to be depending on him at all. He's, buried between, below Goddard and Kmet on this roster. If he turns out, great. If he doesn't, no harm, no foul on a roster that is built this way. I'm also at 17-11 in my Fantasy Pros Championship draft now. Like I said, these things are just overlaying each other like crazy now, almost going at exactly the same pace. On that squad, I think I'm going to take a big swing at Paris Campbell. And so we'll see what happens there. I also took Jalen Hyatt on that squad. I think one of those players after week 1, I'll probably end up dropping once I understand the context of the Giants offense. I do have a lot of Paris Campbell in best ball. He stayed healthy for the first time last year in Indianapolis and, got a nice change of scenery to New York with an upgraded quarterback and an upgraded offensive coordinator and really a path to anywhere from, there's no reason, all the arguments we made for Jalen Hyatt as potentially emerging as the wide receiver 1. Paris Campbell could end up being the other, yak guy, near the line of scrimmage guy, other than Darren Waller for that Giants offense. So it should be interesting. Paris over Wan'Dale, question in the chat. Yes, Paris over Wan'Dale Robinson for me. Wan'Dale Robinson coming off of the ACL. I just don't like it. Yeah, I don't like it there. Okay, this draft is coming to a conclusion here. We're halfway through round 18. Start to see some more kickers come off the board. Cameron Dicker. There's a question about great football names. Cameron Dicker might be one. Zach Ertz still hanging around. Could there be a more miserable guy when you think about veterans who have been on good teams and are just hanging on to? He has to love football so much, man. I mean, he's come back from these devastating injuries a couple times. He's hanging out there with Jonathan Gannon in Arizona and this team that is just tanking for Caleb Williams next year. Zach Ertz, I think if we see prop bets for him to retire during the season, it might be worth putting a few bucks on it. I don't know if anybody listening saw the video circulating on social media of Jonathan Gannon, yesterday that Arizona put up on its social media feeds. It is extremely cringeworthy. That team does not seem bought in, and I just felt really bad for Ertz as I was watching that video. Ertz is probably hoping he gets traded to a solid team like Cincinnati if Irv Smith doesn't work, or Dallas if Ferguson is not a thing. Yeah, I mean, I think, and if you're the Cardinals too, I mean, unless you really are planning on bringing Kyler Murray back like in week 5 and trying to get in this thing, like, maybe the NFC West just takes it on the chin and everyone's, 2-2 or 2-3 or something like that by the time that Murray would come back, and you decide you want to try to compete, and Jonathan Gannon is just an awkward guy but actually has coached the team well and they're performing well. Okay, that's fine, but probably the team's going to be terrible, and it would make sense for them to get what they can for somebody like Ertz, and maybe even for somebody like Hollywood Brown. Could change teams. So that's going to be interesting especially if you're selecting Brown. Can't really feel good about his prospects right now, given what the team's got at quarterback, but he's a player that I would look for to potentially change teams during the season. Yeah, you're right, Diego. I mean, there's nothing more just insincere or less inspiring than, did you have fire in your gut? And looking at the floor, I mean, nobody's running through a wall for freaking Jonathan Gannon. I mean, he actually like scratches his head at some point early on. I mean, there's just no way he's confident. He's outside of his own skin in that whole thing. So Kansas City defense goes, not necessarily defense you would think of as elite, but for those of you playing in leagues with defenses where you still have to play them, sometimes just taking the defenses of the really high-end offenses, it's a way to have access to turnovers. Sometimes these teams are a little bit more susceptible to giving up high point totals because opposing squads have to start playing faster. They start taking more risks. They start, throwing the ball down the field a little bit more in order to get back in the game, because Patrick Mahomes is just buzzsawed through their defense. But what you start to see then is those teams trailing heavily, and then sometimes these squads attached to the high end quarterbacks like that can end up generating a lot of sacks, a lot of turnovers, a lot of opportunities for punt return touchdowns, things like that. So that's the premise behind drafting a defense like Kansas City that may not be thought of as elite to the degree that some of the defenses in front of them are considered, but it makes sense in the context of that 1-1 squad there to take them. And then they double tap the position there with Pittsburgh. Devontae Parker, just hanging around, man. He's like a fantasy cockroach, just soaking up snap share for teams for the better part of the last decade. The Patriots signed him to a 3-year extension here recently. That's pretty interesting. Wouldn't have seen that coming for sure. Okay. It's a free look for the KC defense too, as ML mentioned. Same premise behind my kicker preference here, as we're targeting Riley Patterson for the Lions. Kansas City playing that Thursday night game. That's the appeal. So if you haven't played FFPC before, it is another reminder. You're allowed to start players in the Thursday night football game and then take them out of your lineup and replace them with somebody else. The reason for that is that these high stakes drafts actually go through like Saturday often. And so, the teams that are drafting Friday or Saturday, or even during the game on Thursday, already know the points that have been produced by the players in those games. So they obviously have to, in order to keep it fair, because the season-long total points and team point averages come into the equation for the $1 million, they have to let everybody, play on a level playing field. And so you actually get to see what happens with those players before you decide whether to start them as well. Kate Otten, sorry guys. He was a player that the chat was rooting for. We get a free pick here. We're going to take Riley Patterson in the 20th round. Actually, I might take him in the 19th round so that the team drafting at 12 doesn't take him. We are actually, let's see here what we got. We are going to have a free pick. At wide receiver, we've got Alec Pierce, Michael Wilson, Paris Campbell, Josh Downs, if we're looking for a little bit of upside here at the wide receiver position still. I mean, Indianapolis is going to be a bit of a mess, but did you guys see they cut like all but 3 of their wide receivers earlier this week? And Josh Downs, I think he's going to be the slot player for Anthony Richardson, and we're going to have a low completion percentage, but you would figure that he would have the best connection towards the line of scrimmage, even though he's got that nice big arm. I could see him early in games, in particular, trying to get in a rhythm through downs there. And there's nobody. I mean, yes, they have Michael Pittman. Yes, they have Alec Pierce, but Downs coming in as a rookie with Richardson. I don't like the idea of seeing if we could catch something in a bottle there. At running back, there's really nothing else to write home about. I'm kind of thumbing through there. After we took Howell and Mayer, I'd kind of cleared us out of our priority players. Not any other tight ends that I really want to look at either. So I think this is going to be a running back or a wide receiver for us here. And we are next up. Michael Wilson goes. I think he would have been a potential consideration. Tyler Bass goes. Let's just take Josh Downs. I'll be interested to see and get Dave's feedback on that one at the beginning of the shows for next week. And then we will take Riley Patterson in the final round, provided the team at the 12 spot doesn't take him. If you have any last minute questions before the stream comes to an end here, get them into the chat. I'll answer a couple more before I sign off here. It's been a lot of fun. We're not done with the main event streams either. So if you enjoy this content, seeing how Dave and I strategically put together teams, talking about how this weaves into the RotoViz strategies and how some of the tools help us with the decision making, we are going to be drafting another squad, I believe, next Tuesday from the 102. So it'll be a lot different type of team than this one, because we are going to be selecting from the front end of the draft, which will be interesting, I think. So Jason Myers goes, so we can now feel safe on our Riley Patterson pick.
You are up next.
And we're on deck. All we can do is wait.
Now you are on the clock.
It is crazy, really crazy how closely these drafts are overlapped. I know I've said this a couple times. I just made my 20.2 pick in the FPC draft as well and took Riley Patterson. So that draft is going to be over actually before this one. We got 26 seconds here left for Pretty in Pink. I'm thinking either, potentially a second defense. You could even see a third tight end. Yeah, he goes with McBride. Yeah, I think that was probably actually the smart play for that squad, given that he waited for Juwan Johnson there. So we take Riley Patterson, and that's it. I mean, that's a wrap, everybody. So let's run down the squad here real quick. And then we'll sign off here. So going back up to the top here, we started this draft, if you joined a little bit late, with A.J. Brown and Devontae Adams. We did talk about whether we would have taken Cooper Kupp. He did end up falling to our 202 spot, but it just didn't make sense. My argument there was that Devontae Adams is really kind of in a similar spot, but without the same concerns at quarterback and without the, personal injury concerns. So I've moved Kupp after his hamstring setback. I've moved him below Devontae Adams, and Dave opted for Devontae Adams over Chris Olave and Jalen Waddle, as we were discussing that, and Tony Pollard as well. We take Josh Allen. Really, when Dave and I draft teams, we like to go with the elite quarterback and elite tight end whenever we can get them. So Josh Allen slid below ADP. Sean talked about the importance of not reaching on quarterbacks early in these high stakes drafts. But, I think if you can get Josh Allen after pick 30, you're not reaching. Once Keenan Allen went off the board, Josh Allen was going to become our pick at that point. You see T. Higgins and TJ Hawkinson come off the board. It's time. Travis Etienne, J.K. Dobbins, a very formidable 1-2 punch at running back. I think both of those guys have a great shot to outperform ADP and be, low end RB1s for us. And I think those are both, ascending offenses. Both of those offenses are going to play faster. They're going to score more points than they did last year. Really like the touchdown upside for each of those players in addition to their total yardage upside. Dallas Goedert, Gabe Davis, Brandon Cooks, Rashad Penny, Samaje Perine round out kind of our flex and starting position players. Cole Kmet is a viable tight end 2 that could break out along with Justin Fields. The team just committed big dollars to him. I think he's going to feature heavily into their plans for this season. Marvin Mims and Jalen Hyatt, a couple of rookie swings there. in teams with slightly unsettled wide receiver cores at this point in the season. Chuba Hubbard from Sean Siegel's 0RB list. New Orleans Saints defense is really kind of a run pure defense. You can set them and forget them for about 10 weeks. Kyron Williams is the 1B in Los Angeles, and our boy Sam Howell, Michael Mayer, Josh Downs, and Riley Patterson round out this team. So thank you guys for tuning in. We will be back next week with actually our 4th main event draft of the season. We are chasing that $1 million with everything we've got, and we appreciate you rooting for us. If you have drafted a main event team, want some feedback, throw it to me on X/Twitter at cpatricknfl.com. I'll give some comments on your team and give you some tips before your next draft.